With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
Welcome back to the Epic Universal Podcast. I am entertainment writer Jim Hill, and this is the podcast where we cover the latest Universal news, rumors, and history. And as always, I am joined by Eric Hersey, who is the father of, I got to tell you, the lovely Hunter Hersey, who sent me a really sweet thank you note for the graduation gift I got him. Please let your son know that as part of this note, he said that I'm the cool Disney historian guy that his dad knows. And I just wanted to let him know that I'm thinking of having that put on business cards. Cool Disney historian guy.
Oh, Jim, I got to look at that. So mind you, he wrote that immediately. And so I don't know which podcast episode. It was probably like 45 when we announced that you got him that cool Toad sipper, or that is down in Epic, right? And he wrote it like the next day, and we said send it out, and we got the address and everything. Jim, we just found it sitting on a desk. So he wrote it. I'm like, so you didn't send that? So I'm glad that it made it to you. And yes, I did get to peek at it, and I was it was pretty entertaining for an 18-year-old to the way he wrote it.
Now, speaking, Eric is obviously proud of his son. I'm proud of my daughter Alice, who, by the way, just today shared some news in regard to the Donkey Kong movie. Which did you see the news that I guess Nintendo and Universal have copywritten?
Yes,
that a Donkey Kong movie is coming. But what was interesting is Alice came across this amazing interview with the development team at Nintendo, and as it turns out, everybody who's looked at the Super Mario movie from the other last year or thereabouts commented on, Donkey Kong looks different. Did they change his look for the film? And no, as it turns out, the movie actually fed off of a change in the game that had been in the works for as far back as 2017. Designer Moto Kura talked about how they were working on a new Donkey Kong game that was now set in a 3D world, but the thing is, the player was now looking at Donkey Kong from behind a lot, and they became very conscious of, the back view of Donkey Kong is just basically this mass of brown fur, which would be kind of a monotonous visual. So it was like, all right, if we're doing him in 3D, so, so they made creative changes to his outfit, gave him breeches and suspenders, made his fur look richer. But the interesting thing is now here come the folks over at Illuminations over the hill. They're making their Super Mario Brothers movie. And they're like, well, we want Donkey Kong to be in it. It's like, have you seen our new design? And so, it debuted in the film first, but it had been in the works for this retooled version of the game since 2017. But anyway, I didn't know that. My daughter found this interview. And again, thank you, Alice, for doing that.
That's awesome. Well, yes, thanks, Alice.
Sweet kid.
That's awesome.
All right. Anyway, we have all sorts of Universal news that we have to share this week before our feature, which continues the Jaws 2 story. But before we do that, Eric and I have to acknowledge our sponsor, and that is Unlocked Magic. And if you're planning a trip to Universal Orlando or Walt Disney World, check out unlockedmagic.com. They offer real discounts, up to 12% off of theme park tickets. And with over 10 million in ticket sales, Unlocked Magic is the best option for the biggest savings. So visit unlockmagic.com and save today. All right, so we were talking about hit Universal movies, the Super Mario Brothers thing from Illumination, but of course, last year We also got, a teeny tiny itty bitty film, barely worth noticing, involving a certain green witch, Wicked. And we have Wicked Part 2 coming over the hill this fall. So, we just learned about something that Universal is going to help to make us aware of that, Eric?
Yeah, we weren't sure what this movie was, so I'm glad they're putting some promotion.
Oh, well, there we go.
It.
Yeah.
No, they announced that there's going to be a concert specials that airs in November ahead of time. So it's a 2-hour special event at the LA's Dolby Theater, and it'll air on NBC and stream the next day on Peacock. So, Jim, they do this. The LA's Dolby Theater is that's pretty prominent, right? They've done these specials before.
Well, that if I'm remembering, isn't that where the Academy Awards are? Right there on, as part of Hollywood and Highland. So yeah, it's kind of a big deal to do something. Though speaking of Wicked, and again, this was just something that showed up in my feed just today, but the toys for Wicked for Good have started bubbling up, and we've only just seen Dorothy and Toto from the back previously, and now there's a toy that, and they have a pretty amazing Jeff Goldblum as the wizard toy as well, but these things are starting to creep out there. So if you want certain aspects of the film spoiled, head to your local toy store.
Jim, they got any QR codes on them this year? Do you remember that debacle?
Oh yeah,
I hope they had that fixed.
Yeah, I would imagine somebody in the toy side of Universal is double checking that and triple checking that. But anyway, Wicked, the Wicked stage show and the movie has wonderful music, and somebody else who's brought us a lot of wonderful music over the years is, of course, late great Jimmy Buffett. And used to be something really enjoyed seeing as I walked into Islands Adventure was the what was the name of the plane again?
Is it called the Hemisphere Dancer?
There we go.
Is that right?
That sounds about right. Okay.
See, because I don't remember ever seeing it, Jim, and I guess they brought it back.
Well, it was part of the patio at Margaritaville. Part of that complex as you marched over from City Walk into Islands. And I mean, it's a giant plane. It's kind of hard to mix. But on the other hand, there is a giant lighthouse just in front of you to distract you. So I could see how you missed this. But yeah, it has been reinstalled as part of the Lone Palm Airport Bar. And we had a rechristening? Is that correct?
Yeah, it looks like on July 13th they were hosted. I guess Savannah, the daughter of Jimmy, and the Margaritaville president Dan Leonard basically had a festival or like a rechristening, like you said, and it had live music, Stilt Walker's costume. You could probably find it all online. There's different people talking, but I was just intrigued because it was down. It must have been out for a while. We went there twice last year, so forth. We ate at Margaritaville. I just don't remember seeing it. So I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued to see how big, what is this thing?
Well, again, this is a restored 1955 Grumman HU-116 Albatross, once used by the U.S. Navy, and Buffett bought it back in 95. Parrot heads especially enjoyed this because this was the plane that was involved in the infamous Jamaica Mistake-a. Did you ever hear about this?
No.
There was a misunderstanding, and the Jamaican police shot at the plane while Bono was on board. But
okay, so either Buffett had beef with Bono or he's a big fan of Bono, because that's funny to have that. I want that exact plane. Bring it here.
But that's the thing. It's been part of City Walk at Universal Orlando since '99. So, but no, that explains it perfectly. If it's been away for a year, being restored, of course how can you notice something that you've never seen before? So,
hey, well, I was excited to see. Well, I'll be seeing it right now as I probably am at City Walk eating eating at the moment you're listening to this podcast,
Okay,
guys.
cool. Well, don't eat too much because again, you want to be able to fit into the seats of the various attractions at Universal. Though we got news that Stardust Racers at Epic Universe is doing something to accommodate us hefty folk. Did you hear about this?
Well, I did, and I'm just wondering, like, it's kind of, I don't know. I just thought we would have done this ahead of time because I think they did something like with Velocicoaster not so long ago. But it's funny that we're only open for a couple months, and it's like, oh, we're going to make a modified seat. So from what I understand, there's going to be one larger seat in each train, in each one of those. So that's great for everybody. I'm all for it, but it's just weird that they wouldn't have thought of that ahead of time, right?
Well, I mean, what's fascinating about when you open a theme park is that first you actually have to get the place up and running.
Right.
Then you have to learn how to operate it. And, I think to give Universal credit, this place opened in May. We are now, 2 months into the park opening, and they're working their punch list. It's like, geez, our guests of size aren't being accommodated on Stardust Racers. What can we do to fix that? So, no, again, don't be sad that it didn't happen first. Be happy it's happening now. All right.
Right. Okay. Eat up, and then you'll be able to sit no matter what.
Yeah.
Right?
Enjoy your pizza that you can now take back to your hotel room.
That's right.
All right. Anyway, and speaking of stuff that's being addressed over at Epic Universe, so changing signage at the Monster Makeup Show. This is actually kind of fascinating to me. Can you explain?
Well, I mean, so we know the monster makeup. We've talked about that in previous shows, and this is the experience where really anyone can get a big time, like really professional makeup experience over in Darkmoor. So what they did is they added a new prominent sign that's transformed now at the Monster Makeup Experience. And it's, I mean, ultimately it's just another sign. It sounds to me like it's a punch list item, but my question, and I just now we've been open for 2 months, I'm wondering if this has been a success. Have you heard anything? I mean, do you know of people walking around with their face painted? Is this a success? Because this was kind of like a gamble in a sense for them to do.
It was. And, I have to admit, the makeup experience, look, Disney has its Bippity Boppity Boutique, which is done very well. But at the same time, remember they had their Pirates League, which did not do as well and eventually shut down. And so from the get-go with this, I have to admit, I've been following this very closely. In fact, I remember asking Len about, well, how many seats do they have inside of the actual store, and how many people are they doing? How long does it take? And something like this much signage suddenly displayed, it's like, okay, reading between the lines, what does that say? This is worth following in the months ahead to see.
Well, I'm going to count, Jim. That's what I'm going to do. When I'm at Epic, truthfully, I'm going to look for painted faces, and I'm going to count how many I see just to see, because I just one of those weird things. It's like, I get it. It seems like a cool experience, but if you're going to get rid of something because it's not turning up money, they'll turn that into a store where they'll make more money easily if that's the case. So I'm just curious. Yeah. I hope it's successful. I hope I see a lot of little wolfmen and creatures of the Black Lagoon and all of this, but it's just curious. So it's funny that they put the new sign up there. We'll keep an eye on it. And if we hear anything of like success or feedback, we'll report it.
Okay. And speaking of hearing things, we now have not a listener question. This is a follow-up on a question on our previous Epic Universal podcast, right?
Yeah. Brandon wrote in a couple weeks ago asking about mosquitoes at City Walk. So friend of the show, BioReconstruct, sent over some suggestions how he thinks Universal is managing mosquitoes. And did you see any of these, Jim?
They got by me, but again, I always defer to BioReconstruct, who seems to be an expert on a startling
right
a number of fields. So
well, one of them was that the main mosquito mosquito deterrent is the fish. So and it shows some cool pictures of fish and so forth. But I guess mosquitoes lay their eggs in the water, and as the wigglers or the eggs hatch, guess what? The fish go after them. So many of the fish are actually, they feed on these, and that is the natural pest control. So, but what's even more funny is that he showed the next picture of an osprey. Are you familiar with what an osprey is?
Yes, I am. I mean, in fact, a lot of us who were following the construction of the Velocicoaster know exactly what an osprey is, because this was the raptor that was building its nest on the tallest part of the track, and Universal kept having to go up and go, no, you can't
no,
build
you can't do that.
Can't do that.
Yeah. Well, they're the fish-eating birds, so what happens is you actually have they actually easily eat the fish when they come up to do this. So I guess at the end of the day, there is an algorithm that has to see how many fish can you have and how many ospreys can you have to control the mosquito problem, right? It's just a matter, you can't have too many, because they're all, but it is a circle of life.
There we go.
But that was pretty funny. He also suggested that the dye in the water might have something to do with controlling mosquitoes.
Also true. But as always, thank you to Bioreconstruct once again sharing an intriguing bit of info there. And speaking of sharing, friend of the show, Ashley, passed something along. This is West Coast based, though, right?
Right, yeah. So, the Fast and Furious Hollywood Drift is being done. And if you're following that construction, that's kind of fascinating to see how they're transforming that park. But she was watching a TikTok video and kind of took a screenshot of the coaster itself is hung upside down in testing. It is just one of the what are they, Dodge Challengers, or not a car guy, so I can't remember exactly the model of the car, but it's hung upside down. Jim, is this a normal part of the testing process, or did they just run into an issue? It is upside down on the track in a high elevation point.
Well, Mr. Schul was actually waiting for them to do this, because this is a key part of the coaster test. You have to send the car, you push the car all the way around the track. And in some cases, this is part of the envelope of protection, sort of determining, okay, we don't have any clearance issues. It's only on the other side of a successful push test that you then start to launch the coaster car and get it up to speed and get a sense of, okay, that everything kosher, we're at the speed we need to be at, and that sort of thing. So this is actually a great sign. It's like, oh, cool. They're out doing this. And also, it says a lot about Universal, like how confident about this attraction that they're not doing this after hours. It's out in daylight. It's like, absolutely. Look at our wonderful new coaster. Come back next year to ride it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. It would be terrifying to get hung upside down like that. I don't know how the fire department would get us out, but that sounds like it's just a test. So no worries.
There we go. And speaking of come back, folks, when we get back from this break, we're going to get back to talking about, what happened when Jaws 2 got in trouble and Steven Spielberg offered to help. And after that, we're also going to talk about, what happened when the folks at National Lampoon said, we have an idea for a Jaws sequel. But first, this.
The McDonald's Snack Wrap is back. You brought it back. Ranch Snack Wrap. Spicy Snack Wrap. You broke the internet for a snack. Snack Wrap is back. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there is one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
I'm always looking for ways to show my cat how much I love her. And with Fancy Feast gems, I can pamper her whenever I want with a savory gravy on top of a gourmet mousse pâté. The pyramid shape makes serving simple, so all I have to do is peel and plate to make mealtime feel extra fancy. And with 2 entrees in every pack, it's easy to turn every day into the extraordinary. Fancy Feast gems.
And we're back. All right, Eric, on last week's show, We talked about all the behind-the-scenes drama and stress that took part during the making of Jaws 2, and how that's why executives at Universal Pictures were like, that's it. No more Jaws sequels. I mean, sure, they sell a lot of tickets, but they're just not worth the aggravation in the end. Now, mind you, me personally, I try not to read too much into what John D. Hancock and Jeannot Swart did with their respective directing careers after working on Jaws 2. But at the same time, I can't help but notice that these two guys then went on to bury the needle in the exact opposite direction, Eric. They went from Great Whites to White Christmas. They both did Christmas movies. Hancock helmed Prancer, the Sam Elliott, John Galecki movie.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
I mean, every holiday season it shows up. Again, this is the one from '89. It's become a holiday perennial. Where is Schwark? He directed Santa Claus the movie, which is by the Salkins, who did the Superman movies. This one starred Dudley Moore, John Lithgow, and there's a reason this one doesn't run at Christmas all that often. It's really bad.
I was gonna say I don't remember that one, Jim. So that there's a reason I know Prancer versus this one, huh?
Yep. But I'm just saying, maybe these two gentlemen are looking to atone for putting a pretty middling sequel out there for the movie going public. I mean, look, Jaws 2 did make money for Universal, sixth highest grossing film for that year, 1978. But you know what outgrossed it, Eric? There was Grease. There was Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of a Third Kind and National Lampoon's Animal House. Now, it's those last two films that I want to talk about on today's show, Close Encounters and Animal House, because they both had an impact on the Jaws film franchise. Now, we have talked previously on the Epic Universal podcast about how Spielberg, because he had already signed a contract with Columbia Pictures to go make Close Encounters, he wouldn't be available. When David Brown and Richard D. Zanuck, and that's the producers of the original Jaws film, they came to him in the fall of '75 and said, would Steven be willing to direct the sequel to Jaws? And Spielberg, the way he described it, he was still traumatized from the experience of making that film. So much so that after he finished the final edit of Jaws, Steven never watched that movie again. Until just recently. In fact, as part of the hype for the 50th anniversary of the release of Jaws, again, June 75, Spielberg did an interview just recently where he talked about what he had only just finally watched Jaws up on the big screen. In fact, as I understand it, Universal arranged to have a pristine restored print shown for Steven, and it was actually, you'll love this, they screened it for him in the Steven Spielberg Theater, all right, which is part of the sleek new corporate campus on the lower lot out at Universal Hollywood. But to hear Spielberg talk in these interviews, it's like first time he was able to sit back and watch Jaws, and it wasn't about the trauma, it was like looking at it as a film, and Spielberg supposedly liked what he saw. But again, what we're talking about now is June of '77. And Steven has just finished principal photography on Close Encounters the month previous, May '77. And he's in the editing suite. And this is the thing. The movie's due out in theaters December 14th, 1977. So he's going to be in that room for the next 7 months because, anyone who's ever seen Close Encounters know, very effects heavy film.
Yeah.
And, going to take a lot to edit it together. But, and also, just to be honest here, Close Encounters isn't done yet. Not to Steven's satisfaction. This is why, actually, 3 years later, Close Encounters of a Third Kind, the special edition, gets released to theaters November of 1980. Steven, after the initial film made lots and lots of money, Steven was able to go back to executives at Columbia and go, look, can I have a little more time in the editing bay, and can I also have some more money to shoot some additional scenes? And they were like, yeah, sure, go. But again, we're not talking November of 80. We're back again, June 77. And Spielberg's in the editing bay. He's working on that rough cut of Close Encounters, and he begins to hear stories coming from friends at Universal about how bad things are going on the set of Jaws 2, which is why Steven isn't all that surprised when he hears John D. Hancock has just been fired as the director of Jaws 2, and that Universal is shutting down production of this troubled film as they look for someone new to helm Jaws. But at the same time, Steven supposedly has, that there, but for the grace of God, go I feeling. Because it's like, think about it, the whole time he was out on Martha's Vineyard, 100 days over schedule. He kept hearing rumors like, yep, they're on the plane. They're flying out here. They're going to fire you. They're shutting down the film. You're wasting all of Universal's money. But the interesting thing is that ultimately didn't happen because David Brown and Richard D. Zanuck protected Steven. And so this is why Steven knew at this exact moment that Brown and Zanuck were in a real jam. And out of a sense of loyalty, he picks up the phone. He's there in the editing bay at Columbia Pictures and he calls him and says, anything I can do to help? And Brown and Zanuck are like initially kind of confused, like, what are you saying? Are you now willing to direct the sequel to Jaws? And what Spielberg says is sort of says, well, first of all, if they were serious about this, he wouldn't be available to work on the Jaws sequel until he delivers a finished print of Close Encounters to Columbia. So that would mean they would have to postpone production of the Jaws sequel for at least a year. Which would then push Jaws 2 arrival in theaters back to the summer of 79, which was not going to make exhibitors happy. And then, Eric, there was the matter of the script for Jaws 2, which friends at Universal had already slipped to Spielberg, and Steven supposedly flat out told David and Richard that he thought it was terrible, which is why, he wanted to go in an entirely different direction with his follow-up. He wanted to shoot the story that Captain Quint had told Police Chief Brody and Matt Hooper that night when on the Orca about that terrible time with the USS Indianapolis, and it was sunk by the Japanese sub, and then David and Richard, as politely as possible, shut Steven down. Now they're like, no, we already explored that idea, which, if we're being honest here, that's a prequel to Jaws, right, not a sequel. And they explained that they talked to the Navy and they flat out refused to cooperate, and because they felt a movie about what happened with the USS Indianapolis was going to exploit and sensationalize one of the greatest naval tragedies to happen during World War II. So, but see, Spielberg is not deterred. He's like, well, all right, hang on, I have another idea. In fact, he explains that when he and Richard were on the set of Close Encounters, they'd sometimes amuse themselves by talking about, well, if we were going to make a sequel to Jaws, what would we do? And here's the thing, they came up with a hell of an opening. So picture this, Eric. It's the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. And as the film starts, spread across multiple tables are the remains of the great white from the first Jaws movie. And as Police Chief Brody looks on, Matt Hooper is measuring body parts and is growing increasingly concerned. And why is he concerned? Because these measurements don't correlate to any previous known great whites. This is a different animal entirely. It's only when Hooper consults some million-year-old fossils that he finally realizes what he's got in front of him, and it's like, this is no great white. This is a baby megalodon, a prehistoric series of giant sharks that supposedly went extinct 3.6 million years ago.
Look at that. Yeah, Jim, that sounds like something we'd see years later, right?
Well, no, it's so interesting you bring that up because, again, Steve Alten wrote, The Meg book, which then became those Jason Strahan movies. In fact, the first came out in 2018. The second one, I want to say Meg Deep Trench, that came out in 2022. By the way, just fascinating little side note here. Disney was the first studio to option the movie rights for Meg, and they originally wanted to do them as a series of movies starring Patrick Stewart, the Captain Picard from Star Trek. Well. Anyway, from there, now that we've established, Megalodon, it's like this is a baby. We now move to the Georges Banks, which is off the Massachusetts shore, a wonderful fishing ground, where supposedly an oil rig is being constructed. And as they were putting the foundation in, evidently, the construction team opened some subterranean cavern where megalodons had been sleeping. And now, well, at the very least, the mama is now swimming around the oil rig. But what I love about this story is that, again, it's Spielberg working with Richard Dreyfuss, and Richard Dreyfuss, being an actor, constructed the storyline of Jaws 2. So basically, it's an action film starring his character, Matt Hooper. I mean, actors got to act. So
Right. That's great.
Anyway, Brown and Zanuck listened to this other idea that Steven has, which everyone agrees. Wow, that'd be a hell of a movie. Only problem is going to be incredibly expensive to make. And as we mentioned earlier in today's show, Universal is already $2 million into Jaws 2, the money they spent at Martha's Vineyard. And they're going to want to use some of the footage that was shot on Martha's Vineyard. And so this is why they just say, we can't do that. Not now. But they thank Steven for reaching out. And for reasons we discussed in last week's show, Jeannot Zwark winds up as the new director of Jaws 2. And, as Universal gets ready to move production of that film down from Massachusetts to the Florida Panhandle. All right. So that covers how Jaws 2 was connected to Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and how, if Steven Spielberg had been allowed to explore his idea for a Jaws follow-up, we might have gotten a very different film. But when we get back from this break, we're going to talk about how the folks from National Lampoon, what they would have done if Universal had ultimately allowed them to do a sequel to Jaws 2. But first, this...
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso Virtuo Coffee Machines. Ready to enjoy the bold flavors of barista-quality Nespresso iced coffee at home? Simply fill a glass with ice and press the brew button on your Virtuo Pop machine to enjoy rich double espressos roasted to stand up even when chilled. Refreshingly bold iced coffee. Refreshingly easy to make at home. Visit Nespresso.com to shop now.
And we're back. Before we get to the National Lampoon related stuff, by the way, used to have a subscription to the magazine back in the late 1970s. Had a lot of funny cartoons, articles. But anyway, we were talking about Jaws sequels, especially Jaws 2. And I wanted to share what I think, anyway, Eric, is an interesting observation about Jaws, the ride at Universal Studios Florida. And when that attraction first opened in June of 1990s, and this is the short-lived version of Jaws, the ride, the one that got shut down in fall of 1990, because it just would flat out not work on a consistent basis. On one ride, every single effects would work flawlessly. And the very next ride through, half of Jaws the Ride's effects would only work part way or not at all. So that version of Jaws the Ride actually ended with a recreation of the ending of the original Jaws film, which, remember, Sheriff Brody shoves a scuba tank in the mouth of the shark and then later shoots it. And you see that explosion, that geyser of bright red, great white blood and guts. So before your boat pulled back into the load unload area, that's what visitors to Universal Studios Florida got to see. They got to see this underwater explosion that sent hurtling skyward this bunch of rubberized shark chunks and some red dyed water. Now, when this ride was, and again, because this effect was especially difficult to maintain and operate, this is why when Jaws the Ride was shut down and retooled, it wouldn't open again for 3 years, October of 93. This ride got an entirely different finale, one that echoed the way the shark died in Jaws 2. You remember in that one, the great white bites down on an undersea cable and then gets electrocuted. So, Eric, what I love about this is the irony that Jaws the Ride shuts down in the fall of 1990 for a massive redo and rehab when it reopened 3 years later. And enough of the physical plant had been changed out as part of the redo of the attraction that you really, it's a new ride. It's a sequel, if you will. So how does the ride end? It's now with a recreation of the shark's death from Jaws 2.
Oh, that's pretty clever. Yeah, never thought of that.
There we go. Anyway, and again, that's a scene at Cable Junction with Brody shoving the electrical cable in the mouth. And by the way, that was the very last scene shot on Jaws 2, last day of production, December 22nd, 77. And by the way, I have been told Roy Scheider just absolutely hated working on Jaws 2. That he actually fought coming back to work on that sequel for months because Roy flat out said it's a dumb idea. Why would another shark come back to Amity Island and start eating people? But here's the thing: Universal just kept piling up more and more money, and eventually Scheider was like, "Look, I could set up my family for life here." And more to the point, what kind of sealed the deal is they agreed to pay him $35,000 for every week that the film ran over schedule. And he said, "Yeah, I was on the last Jaws. This could be pretty sweet."
Right. Yeah, that's a good one.
But anyway, he's absolutely miserable on the set of Jaws 2. And he fights with director Jeannot Zwark virtually every day when they're down in Florida. So there's just no way Roy is coming back for Jaws 3. And more to the point, even David Brown and Richard D. Zanuck, the producers of the original Jaws and its sequel, look, they're professionals and they know it would stretch audience credibility. Yet another great white, showed up in Amity and is eating people. Though, Eric, if you actually read the novelization of Jaws 2, again, based on the Howard Sackler and Carl Gottlieb sequel, there's a scene that was supposed to be in the movie right after, again, Brody shoved that electrical cable in the shark's mouth. And as the great white is being electrocuted, Brody is supposed to look down in the water and see that as this shark is in its death throes, Brody is supposed to notice, this great white is a female, and just prior to expiring, it gives birth to not one, but 2 shark pups. So, if Jaws had ended as originally intended, as the screenplay was written, in the final moments of that movie, they would have been 2 baby great whites swimming away that would someday return and terrorize tourists in a sequel. Thankfully, that moment, if it was ever filmed, never heard one way or the other from members of the crew about that, remained on the cutting room floor. But all right, anyway, we mentioned one of the hit films released in 78, actually did better at the box office than Jaws 2, was National Lampoon's Animal House, which of course starred the late, great John Belushi as Delta House Wildman Bluto Blutarski. Another quick side note here. How many of you remember the Jaws parody from Saturday Night Live that they did the very first season there on NBC? This would have been fall of 75, just a few months after Jaws arrived in theaters. This is the famous sketch where Belushi does his impression of Richard Dreyfuss, and Dan Aykroyd is actually Roy Scheider. But it's Chevy Chase as the land shark. Do you ever see this? He tricks his way.
Yeah, I've seen this.
Candygram.
Yep.
So,
yep.
All right. Anyway, Universal puts up the money to make National Lampoon. They also released this John Landis movie, which does so well at the box office. Universal asked National Lampoon to ready an Animal House sequel. And for a short time, Universal Television even did a TV series called Delta House. But again, executives at Universal basically say, look, let's you and I make more movies together, which is why they gave Matty Simmons, the producer of Animal House, his own bungalow on the Universal lower lot. But here's the thing, Eric. Guess who's in the bungalow right next door to his? That's David Brown and Richard D. Zanuck. And as the story goes, one morning in early 1979, these three meet outside of their respective production bungalows and get to schmoozing, the standard Hollywood ass-kissing. I love your work. You make great films. And as this conversation is drawing to a close, David supposedly says to Maddie, perhaps somewhat fatuously, but it's like, we should work together in a movie someday. And Simmons, because again, he works with the National Lampoon guys, so he's a smartass. He supposedly replies, and what would that movie be? You know, what? Jaws 3, People Nothing? And
that's a great line, though. That is such a great line.
It is. It's a great joke. But what David and Richard heard was their get out of jail free card. It's like, here's an idea that actually allows them to do a Jaws sequel that wouldn't necessarily mean that they'd have to go back to Amity Island. They could make a parody film, something that would then send up the first two films in the series. And also, worth noting, just as Jaws 3 is coming to life, Hollywood is suddenly hot for the idea of parody films. I mean, only just recently, the Zucker brothers' script for Airplane was greenlit over at Paramount personally greenlit by Michael Eisner. And that would then arrive in theaters July of 1980 and make a buttload of money. So you can understand in that window of time why the people at Universal might be suddenly, a parody version. Okay, maybe we could do this.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Jim. That Airplane, though, the opening sequence is a parody of Jaws, isn't it?
There we go.
There you go.
Okay.
I thought so. All right.
So anyway, this is why John Hughes, that John Hughes, the guy behind Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Breakfast Club, Home Alone, he gets to work on a screenplay, which starts off. In fact, you can read the screenplay. Well, one of the 6 drafts of the screenplay online. There's a PDF out there. It starts off with Jaws author Peter Benchley stepping out into the backyard of his Hollywood home. He's going to go for a swim, and only to then get eaten by a great white who's somehow in his backyard pool.
That's my fear of every pool as a kid, Jim. That is me closing my eyes.
Welcome to it. It's a horror comedy. In your case, right. More of a horror. But all right. Anyway, what Simmons and Hughes envisioned here was something very, very much like National Lampoon's Animal House. It was going to be a raunchy R-rated comedy filled with lots of naked ladies and profanity. Now, whereas Brown and Zanuck, what they wanted when it came to Jaws 3, People Nothing, was a PG-rated comedy, something that was funny, but not so deliberately offensive that it would wind up with an R rating. And this is because David and Richard were very, very strong believers in delivering PG-rated films, something that had just enough action and edge that it wouldn't get a G rating, and because that'd be the kiss of death with the teenage audience. But at the same time, it couldn't be so edgy that it would get an R, because that would then prevent this huge swath of the movie-going public from being able to buy tickets to a new Brown and Zanuck production. And what's interesting about this is Richard and David were so dedicated to this film production principle that, anybody who's seen Jaws 2 remembers the scene where the great white attacks the Coast Guard guy who's flown in on a helicopter, and the shark actually pulls the helicopter under the water. Now, in the original cut of this movie, that scene continued, and you got to see the poor Coast Guard pilot still seatbelted into his helicopter as the shark came into the thing and started to eat him. So they show an early cut of Jaws 2 to the MPAA, and they come back and said, well, that's a little intense and gory. And if you intend on keeping that scene in the movie, we're going to give you an R. And Brown and Zanuck that day cut that scene out of the movie. They paid a lot of money to shoot that underwater footage, a lot of time building the shark for that specific scene. And it's like, no, if it gets us an R, it's out.
And this is before PG-13, right? So you just go from PG just right to R. Okay. I'm thinking to myself, how is Jaws PG?
Yeah.
But I get it. All right.
All right. So, but again, you see the problem here. Everyone at Universal, very excited about the idea of the National Lampoon people and David Brown and Richard D. Zanuck collaborating on a Jaws thing. In fact, they announced it. April of 79, full-blown article in Variety talking up about how this film is going to go into production October of that same year, 79. But again, there's this push-pull going on about the PG versus the R rating. And again, as I mentioned, 6 different versions of the screenplay get written. And by the way, for a time, this thing was supposed to be a starring vehicle for Bo Derek, the girl from 10, largely because the guys at National Lampoon wanted Bo to basically be naked from the waist up for much of the running time of the movie. And also the script, and again, go chase down the PDF, folks, actually features moments where Steven Spielberg and Richard Dreyfuss were supposed to make cameo appearances. And anyway, things get so far along. Joe Dante, the director of Gremlins and its sequel, Gremlins: A New Batch, he gets tapped to helm Jaws 3, People Nothing. And then suddenly work stops on the project. And again, largely because of this PGR thing. And Zanuck and Brown just flat out said, look, it's a stupid idea to create a film, especially a sequel to an already popular series of movies that was going to keep an entire audience segment, those teenagers who'd bought tickets to Jaws 1 and Jaws 2, from being allowed to see this movie. Whereas Simmons kept going, we made $141 million for Universal with National Lampoon's Animal House last year. And so Maddie kept saying, don't worry about the teenagers. They will buy tickets to other movies that are playing at that same theater, and then they will sneak into showings of Jaws 3, People Nothing, to which David and Richard reportedly replied, well, look, yeah, but then the studio that made the other movie, they get the ticket revenue. We get nothing from teenagers who sneak into Jaws 3, People Nothing. And it breaks my heart. Stephen Furst, who played Flounder in the original National Lampoon Animal House, he was cast to play the lead in this Joe Dante movie when suddenly Universal pulls the plug on Jaws 3, People Nothing. And but interesting, find a little bend on the story. It wasn't just that R rating versus PG rating thing that ultimately tripped up this project. It was more a case of the people at Universal thinking back on their own history and it's like, now, wait a minute. When we made Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein in 1948, the studio was no longer able to make movies around Dracula, Wolfman, and Frankenstein's monster because these previously genuinely scary creatures had appeared in a horror comedy, which meant that audiences no longer thought of these characters as scary. So upper management is like, well, wait a minute. If after we release Jaws 3, People Nothing, what happens if we decide we want to make a serious Jaws movie? Will we have accidentally killed off a very lucrative film franchise for a few cheap laughs. Now, supreme irony here, Eric, is that when Universal Pictures finally does get around to making a Jaws 3, people will still be laughing at that movie, but for all the wrong reasons, and which we'll touch on in a future installment of the series here on the Epic Universal Podcast.
Oh, Jim. I almost agree with him though. Like when I hear it as a parody, like if you need to use the word Jaws to kind of get the people to know, but to honestly go from two serious movies to a parody seems kind of odd. I don't know if that's ever been done. Obviously the Abbott and Costello stuff, but I would a Jaws parody sounds great. What did they ever make one?
Well, it's interesting you say that because think about the Sharknado films, which, by the way,
there you go,
which were actually shot at Universal, Florida, just this past weekend on CBS Sunday Morning. They were doing a tribute to the actor Richard Kind, and one of the clips they showed was from, I want to say, Sharknado 2, and Richard's character was a frustrated ball player who only wanted to make his dad proud, and that would have involved hitting a home run in Met Stadium. And over the course of the movie, he's in Met Stadium, and Sharknado is happening, and a shark is coming at him, and he grabs a baseball bat and hits a home run with the shark. So
okay, so since I haven't seen the Sharknado movies, but I remember them being a big deal.
Yeah,
I guess they are parodies, so that's perfect.
So.
Well, there we go. Well, that's awesome. Well, thanks, Jim. I'm excited to hear about Jaws 3D. Now, I originally thought this was the Jaws that was in Back to the Future 2, but I think that's like Jaws in 3D, but that's like Jaws 38 or something. Remember that little scene?
Yeah, that time it's really, really, really personal. But
right? Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll talk further about this, but for now, folks, we need to shut down here. But as always, we love hearing from you folks. Again, we had Brandon this episode, his question about mosquitoes, which thank to our Reconstruct, we have an answer to. So, but if you have ideas you'd like Eric and I to explore or questions, feel free to send those along. How can they get a hold of you, Eric?
I'm at Eric Hersey on pretty much all social platforms. You could also email me at eric@erichersey.com if you're really interested. But Jim, how can we get a hold of you?
Well, let's see. I am on X and Instagram as Jim Hill Media, and then over on Facebook is Jim Hill Media News. So feel free to reach out to me there. And anyway, folks, that's going to do it for this week's show. On behalf of Mr. Hersey, want to thank you for listening to the Epic Universal Podcast. And please stick around to find out what's coming up this month on the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network. Thanks for listening to today's episode. And if you like what you heard, head on over to Apple Podcasts and give us a review. This really helps get the word out about our shows. We also have some other shows on the network that you might like. Each week, we drop a brand new Disney dish with Len Testa or animation and movie news. Please listen to Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor. By the way, you can also check out Drew's other podcasts, like The Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast, which he does with Charles Hood. For all things Lucasfilm, why don't you subscribe to Looking at Lucasfilm with Brian Gahn? Likewise, we have I Want That Too with the lovely Lauren Hersey, our weekly podcast that features the latest merch and the stories behind that merch. And our Epic Universal Podcast takes a look at the Universal theme park. So please join Eric Hersey and I on that weekly. If you enjoy theme park history, we also host Manufacturing the Magic with Shelley and Noah Valladolid. That podcast tells the story of how we got the modern theme parks that we enjoy today. Join myself, Len Testa, and veteran Imagineer Jim Schul for our latest season of Disney Unpacked, our first ever video series exclusively for Patreon. These get released first Sunday of every month, and each month we release several exclusive podcasts to help support this video series. I want to thank everyone that supports the Jim Hill Media Network. For more information about our podcast and content, head on over to jimhillmedia.com. So that's going to do it for now, folks. Thanks again for listening, and we will catch up on the next show.